to those of you who reached out to me, and I don't know if you can see this, but last Sunday, my mom did make it to her 103rd birthday. It surprised me. I didn't think she'd make it, but she's still with us. And I don't know for how much longer, but every day is a gift. So thank you for those of you who reached out to me. I want to begin tonight by quoting something from this gentleman. Obviously, I'm not doing PowerPoint. I'm doing Patrick PowerPoint. uh, our beloved St. Francis, who said, "Rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We are all born to help each other, no matter how difficult. Life is good when you are happy, but much better when others are happy because of you." I sent out on email, if you had a chance to see a brief outline and a very selected bibliography. If you didn't get a chance to see it, that's fine. We'll just go right through the presentation, but just a brief outline. I'm going to, in a moment, talk about and define what environment is and what the challenges are, then how we got here. And at that point, I'm sure some of us will be asking, well, my God, is there any good news in this? But there is good news, and I will get to that in a few moments. And then I want to talk about the role of Assisi, Italy, and Franciscan spirituality, and give two different but very complementary examples, one being the World Wildlife Federation, and the second being a reference to Dr. Albert Schweitzer and his reverence for life. I am not going to be focusing on Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home because it's quite lengthy. It's about 184 pages, over 37,000 words long, and perhaps that can be a topic of our discussion at a future date. But I just want to make reference to it because that is an important part of a conversation when we talk about the environment, but it's certainly not the only way to approach the topic. So I want to begin tonight by defining what the word environment means. The word environment comes from an old French word, environ, that simply means surroundings. So that would include our local, national, international, and global surroundings. Environment is just not about climate change and clean air and water. It's about an awful lot more. So what are the challenges that we see today in our environment? And there are many, but I will highlight a few. Certainly we think of the changes in temperatures, levels of the ocean, greenhouse emissions, and so forth and so on. We think about energy, including solar, nuclear, water, steam, and electricity. We certainly include food that may consider plant-based diets, farmlands, food waste, composting, natural and genetically modified foods and nutrients, food distribution and transportation. We must consider the topic of water, the pollution of fresh waters and oceans, sea life, coastal wetlands, and ocean farming. We must also include in our broader concept of the environment the lives of women and girls, all people who are sold into slavery and prostitution, the abuses of human rights, the sex slave trade, refugees, education and employment opportunities, fair and living wages, the effects of colonialism and imperialism and fascism. We must talk about our buildings and our cities and include topics such as safety issues and trash. Also, another concern has to do with land use, forest protection, land development, wildlife, and the extinction of species. Transportation, including cars, trains, ships, and airplanes, and certainly materials that we use in our daily lives, those which may be or maybe not are biodegradable, plastics, recycling, industrial hygiene, and so forth and so on. And of course, another very important topic when we talk about our environment, our surroundings, is globally the issue of COVID. Now, I want to share a thought with you, and this is an interesting thought. You may agree, disagree, or negotiate this a little bit later this evening, and this is about COVID. I read somewhere, and this is a very interesting concept, that if we think of Mother Earth as a living being with its own consciousness, that perhaps, listen to this, perhaps human beings are the virus and COVID is the vaccine. If you're sitting in your backyard and there's a fly that lands on your hand, our natural impulse is to shoo it away. Perhaps that's what the earth is doing because of how we are treating the earth. We have become the virus, and COVID perhaps is the vaccine. I know that's provocative, but it is at least remarkable, meaning that it is simply worthy of a remark. So, all of these issues, you might ask next, how did we get here? So I will share with you what I call a brief, very brief history of human life on planet Earth and our natural innate desire to survive. Survival is the name of the game. Life wants to be. There were major revolutions in the history of humanity that have changed the world and therefore have changed us. So we know, for example, that we began our survival as human beings as hunters and gatherers, and the name of the game was simply to survive. Well, there was the first major revolution that we refer to as the agricultural revolution, which began, let's say, about 12,000 years ago. It included the use of simple tools and then more complex tools, which eventually led to the next revolution. But the first step was that agrarian time of human history that Jake had mentioned when he spoke to us a couple months ago. After that revolution came what we also know as the mercantile time of our lives, when we started traveling a bit and trading. And out of that, then later on came what we call the Industrial Revolution, which what really was not that long ago. It began maybe in the mid 1700s with the steam engine, and then the age of science, and then mass production, and so forth and so on. And that era of the mercantile period into the Industrial Revolution changed our world significantly. And then following that, say in about, now I want to divert just a little bit, just to give a little theology, philosophy to you, just to keep this in the back of your mind. In about 1882, that was about 100 years, say, after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, "God is dead." But the full quote is, God is dead and we have killed him. Nietzsche also said, God has died, but plenty of people have not yet heard the news because we were and we are too busy. Now, Nietzsche died in the 1900, yet in my opinion, he was a very visionary figure. He saw what was coming. Quote, this is from Nietzsche. What I relate is the history of the next 2 centuries. I describe what is coming, what can no longer come differently, the advent of nihilism. For some time now, our whole European culture has been moving us toward a catastrophe, end quote. And so what was it that was coming? What did Nietzsche think was going to come, although he died in 1900? Well, this is very interesting. In just 50 short years of human existence, approximately 1900 to 1950, just to play with those numbers, just to keep it clean. In 50 short years of human existence, we experienced the terrible 4. World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, and the atomic bomb. And after those 4 terrible events happened, that was the end of the modern era and the beginning of what we call the postmodern era. It became the horror of existence. During the terrible 4, 2 world wars, the Holocaust and the atomic bomb, at least 93 million people died, and likely many more. 22 million people died in World War I, 60 million died in World War II, at least 11 million during the Holocaust, and another 100,000 or so because of the atomic bomb. And then you can throw in another 50 million because of the Spanish flu 100 years ago. So there was a lot of destruction that happened in those condensed 50 years. Well, we get to about 1950. We had been to hell and back, and lo and behold, we move forward in our next revolution that we today call the information revolution, that began approximately around 1950, and that exploded with computers and later with the internet. That was also approximately the time of what Jake referred to a couple months ago as the as neoliberalism in the economic landscape. It was growth at all cost. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. It seems that the world now is driven by the 3 C's: consumption or consumerism, convenience, and credit. Consumption or consumerism, I want it all. Convenience, I want it now. And credit, I'll pay for it later, maybe. We now are at the point of what I like to call overconsumption. I'll give you 2 examples, and I'm sure that you all could think of many more examples, but I'll give you 2 that I'm aware of in my life. Number 1, I happen to love fresh blueberries. Well, you know what? I can go to Kroger's or Whole Foods or wherever produce is sold any time of the year, and I can find fresh blueberries. In the middle of the winter, whoa, isn't that lovely? Lucky me, I get fresh blueberries. a little fresh lemon rind on top. Yeah. Ah, but where did they come from? Oh, oh, they came from South America or New Zealand. Oh, really? Well, how did they get here? Oh, they were transported on the 747. They were sent to Chicago. Then they were put on a truck to come to the distribution center of Kroger's and so forth and so on. I can get fresh blueberries and a lot of other things anytime I want. And I often don't think about not only where did they come from, but who grew them, who picked them, who packaged them, were they paid fair and living wages? Question mark. Here's another example. I use this one because of my beautiful hair. Shampoo is important. So I go to Kroger's, for example, and do you know that I can find at least 50 different shampoos? I also can find 50 different hair conditioners, and I probably can find another 50 different hair products. Do I really need 150 different products to keep my hair looking good when, maybe 3 or 4 will do? That's another example of overconsumption. What has happened now, because about in 1950, we moved into this era of postmodernism, we called it. Now, I think that we live in an era that's called the era of post-truth. I would say that began around the year 2000, give or take a few years. And in some ways, this is good. It's interesting because anyone in the world with access to a computer or a smartphone can access the computer and post anything about anything. However, here is the problem. Most of what is posted on the internet are opinions or interpretations, but not facts. Now, as you know, there's a difference between a matter of opinion and a matter of fact, although many people speak their opinions as if they are matters of fact. Nietzsche said, there are no facts, only interpretations. So the problem of living in a post-truth world now is that many people will say, there's so much information, so many opinions that maybe are facts, maybe are not, that I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know who to believe anymore. Others might say, no one ever tells the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And the writer Alice B. Toklas said, there is no truth. There never was, there never will be, and that's the truth. And so it appears that the ultimate barometer of quality is quantity. In other words, quantity has become more important than quality, regardless of the truth. And please note, just as a philosophical side note, that there were other thinkers beyond, or including Nietzsche, that that kind of, let's say, bid farewell to the projects of humanity. Immanuel Kant did this with metaphysics. Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud did this with religion. And the great Martin Heidegger did this with philosophy itself. And so now, a farewell to truth. So, what is the next revolution? You may wonder. I think it must be consciousness. I was lucky to grow up as a child in the 1960s. And the best part of growing up in the 1960s as a young man was that I experienced that nanosecond of time when I really believed what the Beatles sang all you need is love. Now, love is wonderful, love is important, love is a lot of good things. But we know now that we need a little more than just love. We need justice, we need education, we need dialogue. And saying or singing all you need is love is simply too simplistic. The world has become much more complex. So at this point, you may be wondering, with good reason, my God, Patrick, do you have any good news for us tonight? Well, of course I have good news. We're Franciscans, so there is always good news. I am going to call this good news tonight the promise of Assisi. And I'm going to share two thoughts about what this promise of Assisi looks like. Number one, and I think this is the truth, not just an opinion, but that's my opinion. Number one, everyone can do something. People are so overwhelmed today and think, what difference can I possibly make? Well, this is no time for apathy, no time to be a couch potato. In fact, it is quite unattractive to be a couch potato. And number two, which I think is maybe even a little more important, is this notion of dialogue. I am a very strong advocate for dialogue, and this is very important. Interfaith, intercultural, and interspiritual dialogue is absolutely essential to our survival. So we can all do something, and we must engage in dialogue. And dialogue, by the way, includes active listening. Now let's shift gears and look at Assisi. Many of us have been to Assisi. I want to go back one more time. That's my goal. I want to talk about a couple of events that happened in Assisi. In September of 1986, the World Wildlife Fund, which now is called the Worldwide Fund for Nature, held a conference in Assisi in which leaders of the world religions were brought together to address global ecological issues in Assisi. The New York Times reported on September 30th, 1986, quote, the World Wildlife Fund proclaimed a new and powerful alliance today between conservation groups and religious organizations in its 25th anniversary celebrations. It was an interfaith gathering and ended with an interfaith service conducted by leaders of 5 major religions. As the world's leading conservation organization, WWF works in more than 100 countries with 19 major and ongoing projects in countries and geographical regions around the world. The mission of the World Wildlife Fund is, quote, to conserve nature and reduce the most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth. Now, allow me to share with you just 2 examples of the vast work that the WWF is undertaking. Number one, the island nation of Madagascar has developed its own distinct ecosystems and extraordinary wildlife since its split from the African continent an estimated 160 million years ago. Approximately 95% of Madagascar's reptiles, 89% of its plant life, and 92% of its mammals exist nowhere else on Earth. Specifically on Madagascar, WWF works with traditional fishermen and government authorities to manage marine and coastal resources so they can not only contribute to conservation, but also benefit local communities. The other example is the Great Northern Plains, which spans more than 180 million acres across 5 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces. That area is as large as California and Nevada combined. This short and mixed grass prairie is one of only 4 remaining intact temperate grasslands in the world. Specifically, Native Americans are this region's original land stewards. Today, tribes manage roughly 9 million acres of the northern Great Plains ecoregion, much of which is rich in biodiversity and astoundingly beautiful. Most tribal communities in the northern Great Plains see a unique cultural and spiritual significance to sustaining grasslands and restoring wildlife. WWF helps tribes achieve conservation success while improving the lives of the communities. As Martha Kaufman, the managing director of the Northern Great Plain Projects, said, quote, "Right here in America is one of the world's most threatened natural systems. The Northern Great Plains is as important as the Amazon or the Arctic and deserves our attention." At every level, the WWF collaborates with people around the world to develop and deliver innovative solutions that protect communities, wildlife, and places where they live. Their work is focused around 6 ambitious goals: climate, food, forest, fresh water, oceans, and wildlife. How very Franciscan. And please consider the work and writings and the documentaries of Sir David Attenborough, who I believe now is 94 years old. A remarkable man and advocate for, the World Wildlife Organization and consciousness awareness about these issues. Now, back to Assisi then. 1986 was a really interesting year in Assisi because in September of 1986, the World Wildlife Fund had a meeting in Assisi and gathered together religious leaders to say, hey, how can we work toward environmental issues and then consider the message of religious leaders and people throughout the world. Well, then just about 2 months later, in October of 1986, 2 months later in Assisi, there was convened an interfaith summit by Pope John Paul II, who coined the term the Spirit of Assisi. Bishop Guizot, the secretary of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, said, quote, "The spirit of Assisi is not a vague feeling, a sentimentalism or nostalgic memory, but an example that peace is not possible without prayer." The 1986 summit called together 90 religious leaders of diverse faiths. The event was known as a World Day of Prayer for Peace, and it was not without controversy. I'm referring to the sacrilege of Assisi, when a Buddhist monk, not the Dalai Lama, he was there, but it was not the Dalai Lama, but a Buddhist monk went up and placed a statue of the Buddha on the altar, recited a prayer, and burned incense. Well, a few of the cardinals got their bowels into an uproar. The sacrilege, the breaking of the first commandment to put a statue of the Buddha on our consecrated altar. Yeah, well, so much for interfaith dialogue. And it was just a handful of cardinals that got very upset at that, and they said this is idol worship, and how dare he do this on our altar? And they did make a complaint, not directly but indirectly, to the Pope, and the Pope said, the coming together of so many religious leaders to pray is in itself an invitation today to the world to become aware that there exists another dimension of peace and another way of promoting it, which is not a result of negotiations and political compromises or economic bargainings. So the Pope listened to their complaint and he said, well, essentially what he said is, well, this is what interfaith dialogue looks like, you guys, calm down. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who was at that event, but he was not the one who put the Buddha on the altar, but he stated, I believe that the only true religions consist of having a good heart. Now, both of these events that were held in 1986, coincidentally, happened while the spiritual world was celebrating what some saw as a cosmic event called the harmonic convergence. You may remember that. The harmonic convergence is the name given to the world's first synchronized global peace meditation, which occurred on August 16th and 17th of 1987, the following summer. This event also closely coincided with an exceptional alignment of planets in the solar system and so forth and so on, and all the New Age people got quite excited. Okay, well then, one more little bit about Assisi. About 20 years later, in September of 2016, there was another interfaith summit that was held in Assisi, led by Pope Francis. And it's very interesting that the setting was in Assisi rather than Rome. That was very deliberate because Rome is the Pope's town. Assisi belongs to St. Francis. And that was quite a successful event that you could Google that and find out more about that. So, in understanding this concept of what I'm calling the promise of Assisi, I want you to know that that is not a place or an event. Rather, I want to, again, shift gears slightly and talk about another very important man that we need to read and learn about, and that would be the amazing Dr. Albert Schweitzer. He was born in Alsace, France in 1875, and he died in Gabon, Africa in 1965 at the age of 90 years old. Dr. Schweitzer was a physician, an ordained Christian minister and preacher, a musician and musical scholar, a philosopher and a humanitarian. He and his wife Helene moved to Gabon, Central Africa, a small country on the equator that was then called the French Equatorial Africa, and it gained its independence in 1960. Dr. Schweitzer and his wife founded a clinic, which became a hospital in this small village of Lambaréné on the banks of a river. Today, the Albert Schweitzer Hospital is one of the largest in Central Africa. Dr. Schweitzer traveled to the United States only once when he visited the Aspen Institute, located in my former home of 20 years, Aspen, Colorado, and he visited there in 1949. I only would have been a year old, so I missed that event. And he did go on to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952. Dr. Schweitzer gave numerous sermons, and there's a collection of 17 of his sermons that given in Europe before he and Helene moved to Gabon, published in a book titled Reverence for Life. One of his most brilliant sermons that was given in February of 1919 was titled Reverence for Life. And I would like to read just the last few sentences of this sermon in which Dr. Schweitzer says, quote, "Reverence concerning all life is the greatest commandment, or expressed in negative terms, thou shalt not kill. Existence depends more on the reverence for life than the law and the prophets. Reverence for life comprises the whole ethic of love in its deepest and highest sense. It is the source of constant renewal for the individual and for mankind. One final note. During an interview before he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952, he was asked what he proposed we all ought to do to follow his example, based on this reverence for life. And he paused and he said, find your own Lambre. I would push that idea out and I would say to us, find your own Assisi. Assisi is not only this beautiful medieval town in central Italy. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, it's special. Assisi is a spirit, it's an energy, it's a force, it's a vibration, it's a way of living. Find your own Assisi. Peace and all good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I welcome any comments, thoughts, agreements, disagreements, or negotiation at this time.
And you have
Many
to yourself
thanks, Patrick.
Go ahead.
Well, anytime anyone trots out Schweitzer and Nietzsche, I know that they're a serious scholar. So well done for two excellent sources.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jake.
You say the last frontier is consciousness. How do you disagree with that? We have been at this for 4,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there to try? We have tried every possible combination of government and economy, every possible combination of law, on and on and on. What frontier is there left to host a revolution?
Well, other than traveling into space, which may or may not be a good idea, I think it's simply the expansion of our consciousness and encouraging and inviting and walking with other people as they grow in their consciousness. It's easy for all of us to talk about consciousness. Yeah, I've got a high consciousness. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I'm not really telling, or maybe that's just my opinion, not a matter of fact. So I think that I think we just want to open consciousness as a way that we continue to expand while we are here in human form on this particular planet. That would be my response to that, Jake.
I think my mom used to say something. Am I still muted or am I unmuted? But my mom used to say something that, and I don't know where she got this quote, and maybe some of you have heard it before too, that Christianity hasn't been tried and found wanting. It just hasn't been tried. So the idea too is that we're imperfect at this, and we say that we've tried Christianity and we've tried different ways of being more peaceful, more generous, and tried the Assisi thing, but we're never going to really arrive at perfection. But there's a quote by Thomas Merton that I really like. I'm sure I'm not saying it totally correctly, but he says, I'm on this road and I hope that I'm pleasing God, but I don't know if I'm really pleasing God. But I know that my desire to please God pleases God. And so that's kind of where I hope that I'm out of that spirit. I'm sure that I fail. I'm sure that we all do. but the fact that we have this desire in our hearts to really follow that Assisi that you mentioned, and in my concept of Assisi and my concept of Franciscanism, my concept of Christianity and Catholicism is constantly evolving.
Hmm.
As a Franciscan, we always recognize our need for conversion. And conversion isn't a one-time lightning bolt, it's
Hmm.
an ongoing process through our whole lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. We have our work cut out for us. We all know that. And the thing is, we only have whatever 80, 90 years, or in the case of my mom, 103 years to do our work. So it's when we talk about, the agrarian age and the industrial revolution and the history of humanity, we have one little tiny slice to do what we can. So it's not, no one said it's easy, but it also, no one said that it cannot be joyful. Of course it can be both. It is both.
Patrick, not so much a question, but just kind of an invitation to go a little deeper for maybe not 3 minutes, because a topic like this, it's very easy to get just way in the weeds.
Yes.
The email that you sent out, the very bottom referenced two other books by some noted authors these days about this idea that the idea of power itself is kind of over, that it's kind of become passé, that power doesn't really mean what it used to mean now that we are 5 decades deep into this bizarre postmodern kind of world. And I'm sure you kind of hinted to this in your presentation too, like postmodernism is not this monolithic bad things. There are brilliant postmodern philosophers that have made brilliant contributions to discourse. Baudrillard, Derrida, et cetera, et cetera. Give us the 3-minute elevator. It's not an elevator, but give us the 3-minute version on like what it means to be alive in a world without power, and how different that is compared to how the world was even 100 years ago.
Yeah. Okay, so it seems to me that the first step in your request would be to define what do we mean by power. And we often associate that power has to do with how much money I have, how much land I have, how much celebrity status I have. And I am, we won't go down that road, but I am not a fan of celebrity, because I think many people today who are celebrities, and I'm thinking of a certain television interview that happened about a week ago. What the hell is it about their lives that we're celebrating? Just so I think that anyway, people attach a lot of ego to having, the power of money, the power of property, the power of recognition. When you translate that into the culture or into the structures and substructures that sustain the world, or we think they sustain it. I'm talking about the economic and government structures and substructures. You got to look twice and say, well, now, wait a minute. Who's benefiting from this? Who is, who's getting the wool pulled over their eyes here, and who is really enjoying the benefits of the progress, the amazing progress that we've made just in the last 50 or 100 years. The two books that I cited on the bibliography, the one book is, and I highly recommend this book, and it's a very easy read. If you've never studied philosophy, it doesn't matter. It's a book that is called The Irrelevance of Power. And I think that's a really important way that power is not relevant. It's relevant to the minds who think they have it. And that book is written by my dear friend who was also my when I taught at the University of Denver, he was the chair of the philosophy department, Dr. Frank Seeberger. He's now retired. We communicate quite a lot on Facebook and email and so forth, and are constantly exchanging ideas. So he went from being, my boss to being the best teacher I ever had to now he is a friend, and he's approximately my age. That's a book that I would highly recommend to anyone. Frank puts this in a way that we just like, wow, how have we bought into a lot of the nonsense of what we call power? And the other book that is quite interesting is by Gianni Vattimo, who's a professor emeritus at the University of Turin in Italy, and it's called A Farewell to Truth. It's sort of in the same ballpark where it's like truth doesn't exist anymore. It's we can say goodbye to truth. It's because we live in a post-truth world for the reasons that I stated in the presentation. But to your question, Jake, I mean, what would that look like? Well, ask the visionaries, ask the poets, ask the playwrights, ask the artists. There are lots of possibilities. And I go back to, we all have the power to do something. So if you're someone who says, well, I don't write poetry, fine. What do you do? What is your passion? Whatever your passion is, follow that, and that will lead to just, I hope, a better world. So I hope I've kind of lightly have addressed, and I hope we have a conversation about these matters in the future, because that's a great and loaded question.
Actually cut out not once but twice during both of the answers to both of my questions. I made it through your entire presentation just fine, but when you were answering both of my questions, my internet connection cut out. So I will have to find the recording to hear.
I hope
your
you can find that, Michael.
Yeah, if someone can provide a YouTube link, or please definitely send me the link to whoever posts the recording.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I like, the quote that sticks with me: we too are trapped in a system and we cannot see beyond it.
Yeah.
But there's more out there. We just have to find these visionaries, because whatever is coming next is something that I am 100% certain we cannot possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Right. That itself is the problem.
Yeah.
Somebody out there has got it. We just got to find them.
Yeah. And encourage them and elevate them. And I think where we're going to find it, and Greg, I trust that you would agree with this, we're going to find it in the younger people today. We have to nurture them. We have to be patient with them. We have to encourage them. We have to let them go off on their antics and blah, blah, blah. It's fine. I did the same thing when I was in the 60s. I was a hell of a kid. I can't believe my mom made it to 103 because of me, but but I mean, it's like I think we have to really be with the younger generations as they are navigating a world that is a lot more complex than it was for me, and it was pretty complex for me. So, yeah.
As you guys are talking about this, the thing that occurs to me is that as Franciscans, we should look for the answer in the poorest of the poor and those that we find the most powerless.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where
Yeah.
that's where it is for me as a Franciscan. And so today, for example, I had a student come into my office, or actually he took an exam today. And after the exam, I talked to him and I said, hey, you're missing a ton of assignments and you're in danger of failing the quarter. And he said, Mr. Lamping, I'm failing every single class. He said, I'm having emotional problems and they're leaking into my academics. And he read me his grades. And it was like, I've got a 38% in this class. I've got a 50% in this class. And he says, Mr. Lamping, yours is my highest class. and in my class, he had like a 67. And so he was failing. And I said, you know what? Stay here and just finish the assignments. And I'll sit here with you as you finish the assignments.
Mm,
Just so
mm,
that, and I said, you're a freshman and you're in my sophomore class. And I said that when I was your age, I failed Spanish of all things. And I had to repeat Spanish. And here I am, a Spanish teacher. And I failed an English class that year too. And I was in a deep depression.
mm,
And I told him, I said, the gift of this that I hope you are someday able to take is that if you have emotional difficulties and if you have those emotional problems, it's going to make you a more empathetic, more sympathetic person to others in the future. And so, what you perceive now as a weakness and as your darkest moment will someday, hopefully, if you allow it to, if you come through it and you transform, it can be a very transformative thing for you.
mhm.
And, and he said as he was leaving, here he is, a 14-year-old kid, and he said, Mr. Lamping, I always thought you were my favorite teacher. Now I know you are.
Ah,
So it was really cool. And so anyway, and I'm under some fire at St. X because I tend to give kids a lot more opportunities than my colleagues do.
mm,
And so they kind of see me as, the good cop, bad cop. Well, Greg's the good cop. He's always going to let kids buy with stuff. And he's not holding them accountable and things like that. And I beg to differ. I'm holding them accountable, but I'm giving them multiple. I don't expect every kid to hit a home run on their first time at bat.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I really do want them to have as many opportunities as they can to show me what they know. And so it's one of those things where, this has really been helpful tonight
Mm,
because for me, you talked about, following your passion and finding your Assisi and things of that nature. And as I'm getting to the point now where sometimes I think, yeah, maybe I could do this gig until I'm 70. And then there are other times when I think, well, maybe I can do this gig for another 7 minutes. uh, it's one of those things. And, I see that I'm kind of approaching the end of my academic career.
mm,
As I'm going to turn 60 in a year, and retirement's not that far off the horizon for me. But what do I hope I bring to St. X, and what do I hope that I bring to my students?
mm,
And what I really hope is that I show them some compassion, and that I give them my love for language, my love for learning, and that they can take that with them for the rest of their lives. And whether that means that I give them a couple of extra chances to turn in assignments or to do a test or something like that, what ultimately matters is, do they really have a good experience, and that are they more in love with the Lord? Are they
mhm.
more in love with life? Are they more in love with the subject material as a result of that?
Yeah.
And so I'm starting to come to the conclusion that I can't let my colleagues' rigidness and uh, their sense of, and I can't fault them for theirs. I mean, they have to find their own Assisi as well. But sometimes I let their opinions and their um, uh, affect me. And today, I actually, before this, I was feeling really down.
Mm.
And so I went into the bedroom and laid down for a while. And, I was kind of late to the party here tonight as a result. But yeah, this was good.
Thank you for sharing that, Greg. I think sometimes what we do, especially in academia, we set these standards that are so high, and the whole grading system is about power. And when I was and I had colleagues also. I mean, at Xavier University, was all about academic rigor, and I hated that phrase, rigor. Like, I think rigor, that's like rigor mortis. Do I want to teach students to be rigorous? I hate that phrase. And when I taught, I got amazing reviews evaluations for my students, because I'm a character, I'm an actor. I show up and we learned and we had a good time. And so one day I was called into the office. It was for the philosophy department, and the chair of the philosophy department was a brilliant man, and he sadly passed away. And he's looking at my evaluations, and he said to me, "Well, you certainly are a popular teacher." And I thought, okay, I can play this too. And I said, "Well, thank you, Bob. I also think I'm a good teacher." Bam. That was it. Nothing else to say. And one other little note I'll share from teaching. So one time I gave a young woman in one of my classes, her final grade was a B. Well, she came to my office and she was furious. "Why did I get a B? Rah, 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 rah." And I sat and I listened and I said, "My dear, you got a B because you did very good." See, and the whole mindset, like, and I understand, like, maybe she was ambitious, maybe she wanted to get into medical school or law school, where one B on her record could prevent that. That's the kind of nonsense in academia that I'm so glad to be out of it myself. But I had a good run, but I know what you're saying. It's like we forget sometimes, why are we there? Why are we there for our students? It's not just about, how much you learned and what are your grades. And I mean, come on, you got to do the work. You got to,
Absolutely.
but yeah, it's complex. It's kind of another conversation, but it touches upon this one structure or substructure of power that JQ just brought up, and the irrelevance of power.
And can I share something?
Please, Mary.
You say your Assisi or your passion, children, learning, teaching. I left teaching, in 1989. Now I'm a librarian. I'm still teaching, but without the, I don't have to give A's, B's, or C's.
Right.
I can, I love, my passion is the littles, like the 2s and the 3s, all the way up through early grade school. And just letting them know how much fun it is to read and being in the library and read stories. And I've come a long way. I used to be real self-conscious, but now since I've been at Hyde Park, parents come to my story times all the time. I don't care. I'm glad they come, but I just do what I do. And the kids, I'm just enjoying the kids. And if they think I'm crazy or silly, I don't really care. I'm just enjoying myself.
Yeah.
And the parents love me. I love them back. The kids love me.
Yeah.
So that is my passion. Is to and it's fun.
Can I share?
Can I share one more thing? One more thing was, to do things. I don't know where I heard this. This one person was feeling bad because, they play a little bit piano, they sing a little bit. And this person complimented them. "Gosh, I really, I admire you because you have the courage to try the singing and try the piano. You sound good." And the person said, "Gosh, I always felt like a failure because I didn't perfect it. But you enjoy it. You can see that's kind of freeing for me. I mean, I'll never, I love I love, music, and I'll never be a professional person, but I love it, especially with Sweet Adelines now that I sing with. That I'll never be, I'll be good, but I'll never be like, hey, you're going to the Olympics of singing, or you'll be, I'm part of the group, but it's freeing. It's like, because it's something I enjoy. It's a passion. Okay, I'll be quiet.
No, and that's wonderful, Mary. That's another example of what I said earlier about it's not so simplistic to say all you need is love, because what is in the envelope of love is education and justice and rights and so forth and so on. So that what you just described is a beautiful celebration of how you love your students and your work. So keep doing it.
My kitties.
Yes, that too.
Patrick,
Yes.
yeah, okay, I was listening to what Greg said, and if I was his student, I would look at him and say, thank you for being a friend. He cared, he showed his compassion, and if he stands out like a sore thumb, and well, look at our Lord, how he gave his life to us,
Mhm.
and what did we do to him?
Mm, mm.
Where Greg is standing up and giving that child hope. And there's a place he can go and somebody cares and listens.
Yeah.
That is what love's all about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Beautiful.
You know, sometimes I think as institutions, we kind of lose focus of what's really important. I can remember one summer I was the remedial or summer school secretary, and the remedial math teacher had his wisdom teeth out. So they asked me if I would take over his class. And they're like, you just need to, you know, do the tests and stuff like that with these people. Well, I mean, there was one little boy there who they kept telling was a failure. He's in remedial math because he couldn't complete the page in under 2 minutes. 2 minutes and 30 seconds, he could have 100%, but 2 minutes, he couldn't do it. So they kept labeling him as a failure. And I, you know, and for me, that's absolutely criminal.
Yeah. 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 That's an abuse of power, in my opinion.
That's the way I feel about it too. And unfortunately, right now, the culture in my department is more like the culture that you were talking about there, Paula, where it's kind of a one size fits all and
Mhm.
everybody has to do it. And I brought this up about a year ago in one of our meetings. And I said, you know, one of the things that I like to do as a teacher is I like to consider that each of my students is on an IEP. You know, that every student is on an individualized education program.
Mhm.
And so that, you know, for me, it's as a language teacher, I want students to be able to demonstrate to me that they can do things. So I have all these can do statements. I can introduce myself. I can talk about this. I can whatever. And so I do that. And some kids can do it on their first try. Some kids need 10 tries to get there. And so I kind of individualize the program because there are some kids that are ready to move on and do it faster and can do great things. Other kids need more time on the same subject. And they can be in the same classroom sitting right next to each other, and it doesn't matter. You know, I don't feel like I have to have the whole class move at the same pace at all times. I can accommodate students and make certain that every student is improving to the best of his ability. And I brought this up. I said, we're doing a review of St. X, and I said, and we're devising a questionnaire for ourselves and for our community. And I said, could we have a question on the questionnaire? Do you, for the students, do you have opportunities for individualized instruction? That's that, and I just proposed that as a question. Well, the question got shot down. Well, that's not what we're about as an institution. You know, we're not about, you know, individualized tutoring. Well, in our literature that we send out, and something that, you know, is part of every Jesuit school, even Xavier University, is this idea of what they call cura personalis,
Mhm.
care for the individual. And so my thought was, I didn't say it out loud, but my thought was, if we're not going to do this, then we might as well cross the words cura personalis off of our mottos
Mhm.
and off of anything. You know, if we're not willing to individualize, then, you know, why even have those words in our statements?
Yeah. Yeah.
Our son, when he left
Michael?
St. X after sophomore year, he taught us a lot. We let him do what worked best for him. He's so successful, so much better. I
Mhm.
wished I had learned that earlier in his career, but thank God we did.
Yeah.
I admire him. He found what works. He's going to finally graduate, I guess, this summer or this fall. He'll, it'll be his associates in hospitality management.
Mhm.
His dream is to go work at Disney for a while.
Well,
So yeah, I mean, he's successful, but he's doing it at his own pace.
yeah.
And I wish I had learned that earlier, but we did. And thank God we did.
Michael, do you have something to contribute?
A couple things, yeah. First of all, thank you, Patrick. Nice job. Appreciate you doing that for us. It was good, very thought provoking. And there's like 30 different things we could discuss. That was so rich. So thank you. And I guess I'm a paradox. I actually like academic rigor, but I'm pretty sure as a teacher of adults in leadership education, I'm pretty sure I modeled myself after Professor Keating from Dead Poets Society. So I guess I'm a paradox because I like both. So it was good. Power is an interesting subject. I've been thinking about it a lot and writing about it a lot lately. Power is such an interesting thing because I notice the people who want power the least are the best. The people who want power are scary. Concentration of power scares me, whether it's in a government or in a school or in a community. It's a scary thing, and it's not a healthy thing. And I think, I always go back to the greatest sin, right, of hubris, which was, we go back to the Garden of Eden, which is basically, I want to be God, which is like, I want to be all powerful. So it's interesting how things play out. And yet I think about my heroes are Francis, are Teresa, who were not powerful as the world defines power. They were powerful in terms of their inspiration and what they did. So it's a really interesting subject. And I've seen people, I see things in society where, and particularly about what's going on with race right now. I don't see a striving for brotherhood and decency and respect. I see a challenge for who's going to be in power. And that kind of concerns me. It doesn't feel right to me. So anyway, that's my two thoughts on that. I know in the end, I do get a little squishy. I admire the 60s. I listen to a lot of, I'm a revolutionary myself. I get a little squishy when it becomes too humanistic for me, because I think for me, and this is going to sound really, really campy, but I believe it's true. I believe at some point we all have to turn to the God of the universe and convert, like Greg said, convert ourselves every day to him. And some of this stuff gets overwhelming or gets depressing. Some of the stuff we see in the world.
Yeah.
A lot of the destruction, whether we see it with the rainforest or just somebody just, throwing their dog out their window because they don't want him anymore. I mean, that just kind of hurts me at a very real level. But I know for me, I have to kind of turn to the one who made it all, who made me, and recommit to him. And that's where I get my strength and my joy to light my candle to do the best. But it's a confusing world. It's easy to get wound up. And I was definitely, as a younger man, I was definitely Rage Against the Machine, which is both a concept and a really crazy rock band. And there's beauty in that, but that can be over romanticized as well. And then you're just like, and I saw this one time, it really caused me pause. There was a guitarist, there was actually a guitarist for that band, Don Morello, who's playing with a different band. And on his guitar, he had a sticker that said, give the poor, and I thought it was going to say food or shelter or love. And it said, give the poor power. I thought that was weird and troubling, even though I understand the anger behind that. But I know anger is not a great way to lead with things, although I know I can get swept up to the anger of the injustice that I see around me. And so it's an interesting paradox of the economy and something I personally have to work with, because I am generally a really happy person. And I giggle when I get to go feed my chickens, to be honest with you. I in the morning when the sun is cracking and the chickens are just doing their thing, I feel so blessed. I rapture sometimes. And then I get to the ugliness of not necessarily the world of society, and it's hard. It's hard. And then I have to really, really just turn it over to the one. So that's my two thoughts. Couple thoughts. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And what I just kind of heard there was that there's the philosophy of Bob Marley, power to the people. It just and when I made a reference to the 1960s, that's when I came of age in so many ways. There was a lot of turmoil in the 1960s, as there was in every decade. There was a really dark, ugly side, and that's why I very carefully chose the phrase that I had that nanosecond of time. That's all it was, but that was enough to sustain me for the rest of my life. That's all I needed was that nanosecond of all you need is love. And then, the next nanosecond is like, yeah, that's bullshit. But I got it for a nanosecond. And here I am.
I totally get it. I totally appreciate that.
Patrick, when you were talking about finding your own spirit of Assisi and and everybody can do something, it reminded me of one of my very favorite quotes from Howard Thurman, the 20th century African American mystic. And he said, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And I love that. I love that thought.
Yeah. Thank you, Diane. Howard Thurman, what a gem he was. Woo. Yeah.
Yeah, I took a class at the Hive with do you know by any chance Adam Clark?
I don't think so.
He's a young theology professor at Xavier right now.
Oh, who he is? Yes, I know who he is. Yes. Adam Clark.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work on Howard Thurman, and
yeah, he's a good
boy,
man.
getting into some of his mystical thoughts has just been really eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
When you were talking about power, I was flashing back to when my son was in second grade. He came home one day and he says, right before Easter, and he said, "Mom, the board is blurry." And I said, "Well, okay, we'll make an eye appointment." We went to the eye doctor and he needed glasses. So he goes back to school after Easter break and he's wearing glasses. And his teacher said, "Why is he wearing glasses?" I said, "Because he was having a difficult time seeing the board and he needs glasses." And she said, "Well, I didn't notice he was having a problem. I didn't think he needed glasses." I was like, well, the doctor said he did.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow.
I was just wondering, Patrick, with this whole kind of post-truth, postmodernism situation we're in, just like how much of this is contributed by the many barriers that we get to even wanting to even know the truth. All of our very many biases, our confirmation biases, and the biases of our group, and things like that, and how much we think that contributes to.
Well, I think that the concept of that we live in a world that is post-truth is disturbing. It's sad. I think there's an element of truth to it. An example that I think of currently is what people are now calling the cancel culture. In other words, if you say something or do something that I don't agree with, I'm just going to cancel you. You just don't matter, Well, where's the opportunity for dialogue in that? It's in some ways it is a sad commentary to acknowledge that we live in a world that is post-truth. It's unfortunate. But I do think I think it's accurate. It's sad, but it's also accurate. I wish it weren't so, but that's where we're at. So how can we deal with that? How can we embrace a post-truth world.
But, you know, I mean, in one way, to me, you focus on the one and only truth and the way and the light.
Yes.
And that's, you know, that's an easy way, but that's what I believe, you know. And then, you know, I think, you know, I always reflect on, the Screw Tape Letters, C.S. Lewis, you know. And, you know, they always said, you know, they were talking, the devils were talking, and he said, you know, if a person's really high, you know, and to pray to God, can't touch them. If they're really low, they're ultimately going to turn to God. You got to keep them in that middle complacent space where they're not thinking too much. And at one point in the book, the guy was going to have a conversion. He said, don't worry, just make them hungry.
Yeah.
And I think about these many distractions we get pulled into that are related to the non-truth of it all, right? Because it's sensationalized, and it's you know, we have this term in our society now called FOMO, right? Which is a total lie for those not as young as me, who's 20. I'm just joking. Now, FOMO is fear of missing out, right? It's this whole thing. It's our whole society is based on, you want to miss out on this, fear of missing out. You don't want to miss out on this. You got to read this article. You got to see this. You got to see this interview with a billionaire interviewing another billionaire, and I'm supposed to feel really bad for him. I'm just a little confused, but there's so much thing, and I think about that. For me, even like, I mean, I can watch a lot of TV sometimes, and man, wouldn't I rather just be walking in nature? Because I know I love that way more, or reading a book, or going to take my wife's neck, but the distractions are a part of that non-truth thing, and then you can get sucked into it because you either get angered by it, or you get confused by it, or you get sensationalized by it. But
yeah, that's true. And you know, and I would mention that because a lot of the, you know, the buzz in the news and on social media this week has been about the interview that had happened last week with Harry and Meghan and Oprah, and I gave it some thought because it was just so present. You know, everybody's talking about it and digesting it and celebrating it or complaining it. And I go back to, you know, what I said about the irrelevance of truth. Those three characters, they themselves are irrelevant. They are irrelevant. What is relevant are the conversations that have come up because of them going on TV with that silly little interview. Because now people are talking about, well, royalty, isn't that really outdated? How is that really serving people? The very concept of royalty. What about colonialism? What about racism? All of that stuff has been boiling in the pot because of that stupid interview on television. So I guess there was some good that came out of it, even though the interview itself and the characters themselves are quite irrelevant. But relevance came out of that. So maybe there's, you know, a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know.
I like that optimism. I think there was some more irrelevance because there was some cancel culture that came out of it, that if you didn't view that one way, you were canceled, i.e. Pierce Morgan, or, you know, who I'm not a fan.
Yeah, exactly. All of that fed into it. Yes.
Yeah, but it's weird. And I'm thinking, like I said, and it's me, I should have more compassion. It's hard for me to have compassion for 2 billion or 3 billionaires talking to each other. You know, I'm serious. I'd rather take that hour and go do something that John is always doing, which is helping somebody, you know, checking on his neighbor. It's my fault.
Yeah.
And it was so, and really it was so pervasive, Patrick. It was everywhere, man. It was just,
oh yeah.
Was it? But hopefully there will be good things coming out of it. But it's hard to see sometimes.
You know, that reminds me of an episode I had. I've been retired 10 years, so this was maybe 15 years ago, and I took a group of Xavier University students to Peru, and it was kind of a service learning type of trip. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks we were down there. It was not a long. And the first night that we arrived in Lima, Peru, the woman there who had organized all of the logistics, I had said to her in an email, our first night, can you, what I said, could you take us out to a nice Peruvian restaurant? What I meant by that was an authentic Peruvian food restaurant. She ended up taking us to the most expensive restaurant in Lima. And we walk in and we're wearing, you know, jeans and hiking boots. and everybody else are dressed in suits, and it's like, we can't go in here. I mean, we're not dressed for it. And the manager came up and he's, oh, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy you're here. I said, well, we're not dressed. Oh, no, we have a, table for 15 set up. Well, some of my students refused to order from the menu. That was their way of protesting. Others did eat, although there was, and we could have, Xavier University could afford it. So after we got back to where we were staying, my students wanted to have a meeting, and some of them were very upset with me that I orchestrated going to this very fancy 5-star restaurant. It's like, I didn't know that she was going to do this. That's not my intention. And I sat and listened to them, and I said, well, wait a minute. Aren't we taught at Xavier University and other institutions to see God in all people? What prevented you from seeing God in those rich people sitting there having their expensive dinners? They did not like that. That's all I can say. Why did you fail to see God with, these people dressed to the nines, eating probably in the most expensive restaurant in Lima? But they didn't, oh no, we came here to be with the poor and serve the poor and blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe these are the poor. Maybe these are the poor in spirit that we need to, like, I don't know. It was interesting though, that they didn't want to hear that. That the poor were only assigned to the people living in shacks. That idea. Yeah.
I watched parts of the interview that we mentioned before too, and exactly what you're saying, Patrick. I didn't necessarily look at them as 3 billionaires. What I did is I looked at them as human beings. And I said, they had this human experience of pain that definitely affected their lives. And they were concerned, their major concern was the safety of their son. And to me, that it was such a human moment. And that was, and it was real for them.
Yeah.
And so, I understand, are the people, the royalty and all this other kind of things. And so I think as Franciscans, we need to, as you so poignantly put, sometimes the rich are the poor in spirit.
Yeah.
So we need to be attuned to that and treat everyone as a human being, whatever their station in life might be.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, Greg, because to be quite honest, I was a little bit harsh against Meghan, Harry, and Oprah. I was disgusted by them. But then that's when I had to come to terms with that they themselves are irrelevant. It's not about them.
Right.
It's about what do they represent. And yeah, and that's a very legitimate concern. They do have a concern for the safety of their kid and so forth and so on. Yeah.
Well, and what is so cool about Oprah is she likes to give stuff away, and she can do it. To have that amount of money and help people. And that's the sense that I get from Meghan and
Harry.
That they want to be I forget the word. Philanthropists. Granted, they live a very grand lifestyle, but I think what I came away with was good hearts. And I fell in love with Princess Diana because she was my age. And it was so cool. It's like, that's a real princess. I mean, she had a very tragic life, but
yeah,
just the humanness of them. I mean, they're not perfect. I don't want to judge them, but that's what I came away with. That they're trying to be good. They want to do something positive for the world. That is Oprah's whole, I think that's her thing. I don't know. Anyways, that's my 2 cents.
I'm going to end the recording now so it doesn't get much longer.
Okay.
So continue to communicate. This is awesome.
Thank you for doing that, Glow. I